first I want to say that you see the star words around the sanctuary, and we put up as many as I had, and there will be many more, but I want to say that my 15-year-old son helped me put them up, so if you see any in funny places, it was because I repeatedly had to remind him that it is not an Easter egg hunt, and they are not to be hidden. So some of them were moved, and some of them were ridiculous, and if you can't reach one or there isn't one for you, please let me know. So there's that. But you know how all your children or grandchildren are really into astrology these days? If you've peeked over the shoulder of a teen or young adult on Snapchat lately, or really any social media platform, chances are you watched them look up their star chart, their astrological sign, and all of the data you can get now. They may have even offhandedly asked you what time you were born and where, so they could run your numbers. Generation Z loves their shallow dives into stars, signs, and charts, and will plan their relationships and days around it, however briefly or comically. I have seen this repeatedly in my own house. It's too bad there aren't more of them listening this morning, because the gospel for Epiphany today, which means manifestation in Greek, is chock full of astrology, magic, star signs, even essential oils and incense. You may know this already, but let me remind you, the travelers in our story were not kings, they were magi. Magi is plural for magos in the New Testament Greek, which just means astrologer, or honestly, magician. It's the same root. These astrologers would presumably have studied the movement of stars and planets and interpreted these as signs that an important event in the world was occurring. They were not over there deciding to keep that coffee date with a tourist this week or invest in Bitcoin before the new moon, which nobody recommends anymore. But they were looking more globally and considering the stars as an anchor for wonder, an invitation to reconsider what they thought they knew, an opportunity to get in step with things they might not otherwise choose. More specifically, given the historical context and their description, they probably were Zoroastrian priests who were attuned to astrological phenomenon. Eventually, these characters became kings in our tradition to help us connect this story to what we heard in Isaiah 60 this morning and in Psalm 72. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Kings to the brightness of your rising, said the prophet Isaiah. They are wise. They can tolerate mystery and start out on a journey not knowing much about the destination. But we don't know much else. We don't even know if there were 3 of them. We think this because there were 3 gifts. In Persia, members of the priestly caste were called magi, so perhaps this could be their point of origin. But honestly, they might not even have been traveling together. So sorry about the 3 kings from Orient R, which I assume is between Orient Q and Orient S, and there is your terrible joke for the morning. But do you see how culture just fills in the blanks for us, and we are convinced that we see what isn't actually there at all? God leaves much more room for wonder, much more room for finding ourselves in the story. We fill it all in over time because we want a complete picture. I know I do. We are sometimes afraid to use our imaginations and step out into the unknown, to really trust. The Magi are not afraid, for this is exactly what they do. It's what this story is about, and why it's so ironic that we gave them names and countries they were from and all sorts of details that aren't there at all. And they show up in Herod's court, ask him a question and better directions, and we are told when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all in Jerusalem were frightened with him. Some translations use the word troubled here. But in any case, there was fear in Herod's court when the Magi came, and they asked him, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews?" No king likes to hear that there is a new king while they are still king, but fear, that's an interesting ripple. Everyone else is troubled by this, frightened, because this is a destabilizing moment in King Herod's reign. He was a truly awful tyrant, and since he shows up in the lectionary a few more times, I'll share that extra biblical sources tell us that Herod was a very ambitious and skilled politician, a schemer who worked really well with the Roman Empire, as well as a brutal man who, according to the Jewish historian Josephus, killed his father-in-law, several of his 10 wives, and 3 of his own sons. Really, anyone he saw as a threat, he'd eliminate without losing sleep. If Herod was troubled, everybody else was disturbed too, because it meant danger. It meant that people were going to die. If the Magi are not kings, they still serve as an excellent contrast to the despicable King Herod, who knew from the prophet Micah that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem and not Jerusalem, where the Magi followed the star and ended up at his table. Herod knew this, yet his response was not to visit, but to murder all Jewish boys under 2 years old. You could say that these Magi were the wrong people. They weren't Jews looking for the Messiah, who were doing the right thing. But along the way to the right, to ending up at the light, they made a big consequential mistake, probably many of them. It was not a linear path, not a journey without regret or difficulty. Few worthy journeys are. This is not a historical story, but a tale of the cosmic influence of Jesus' birth. It is improbable and ridiculous that wise magicians from a foreign land would travel to Jerusalem only to learn of their actual destination from someone who wants to kill the one they seek, and then bring this boy, born in some dusty backwater, gifts fit for a king. It is absurd. And spoiler alert, it is only going to get more absurd from here. The poor will be blessed, the last will be first, and the Son of God will be nailed to a cross. We can say, however, that historically something did happen in the sky. And these Magi happened upon a sign and acted on their discovery. They embarked on a long journey, carrying gifts, eager to honor whomever they found at the end of this journey. Essential oils, incense for healing and prayer, and plain old cash gift cards. I wasn't kidding, this is a Gen Z gospel. They gave what had value, and practically so. And what the family gave to them was something just as valuable: hope, joy, delight, a sign that all is not lost and that something wonderful is afoot in the world. Their efforts led them to an encounter far beyond their expectations. It led them to joy. The king before whom they finally knelt after a long journey was not yet a king. It was a child. And when they ended up in Bethlehem in front of a child and 2 poor people, did they freak out and point fingers and blame each other? No. The text says that they were overwhelmed with joy in verse 10, which is an understatement. The literal translation is emphatically redundant. It says something more like they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. I like to think they giggled, they cried a little, they whooped and jumped and tilted back and laughed because it was just, they could feel it. This is different. It's special. There is something going on here that we cannot name, they said with a look from one to another. It is a mystery we can feel, and we know it tells us something true about who we are. Their Let's Honor This King project was elevated into worship of the very best kind, the kind that widens the circumference of what they knew up until then of joy, the kind that honors everyone in the room, not just the king, and leaves you standing there without words. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. So then they have a dream. Wait, all of them or just one of them? We don't know. It's not real specific, but the dream wants them not to return to Herod. So here we have another moment of trusting their collective gut and choosing to do something off script. These guys just don't quit with the inner compass bit. They are 100% committed to this, and they go home by another way. The dream said, don't take the path you know. It's time for something different. How do they know? I don't know. They just knew. So how can we even say they are wise? How are they wise? Because they looked up and saw a star and decided to follow it and didn't know where it was going to lead them? They followed something that started in one place and ended up somewhere surprising. This is what passes for wisdom? Perhaps they were wise because they were some of the first people in our stories to just say, we don't know. All they know is that they are seeing something amazing. Something is happening, and they are going to follow it. They had a dream. In his book, Let Us Dream, Pope Francis says that dreaming is often a way to get out of crisis. I'm paraphrasing, but Pope Francis says that dreams are a part of the spiritual life, that inner space that each of us is called to cultivate and guard, where God manifests himself, like an epiphany, and often speaks to us. So when was the last time you just had an intuition, maybe a dream, mixed with a little bit of magic and a dash of planning, and you just went with it? If you're like me, that is not your style at all. Reverend Wendy and I were talking this morning about how she's a P on the Myers-Briggs. I am a J. I am going to nail down all the details as much as I possibly can. But in an age of worry, a time of plans that fall apart despite our best efforts, more often than they hold, could it hurt? Would it be so bad to watch and listen to your own inner wisdom, informed by prayer, and then consult with your friends who don't think you're nuts, or maybe they're just crazy in the same way you are, and say, let's try this direction? Is there so much to lose that can't be regained in a new way? Even if you trust the wrong people and make mistakes along the way? We say, what if I take this crazy trip and I don't find anything of value at the end? What if it's all just a hot mess and more trouble than it was ever worth? I suspect God says something like, if you didn't find what you wanted to find, maybe you weren't looking carefully enough. Maybe you got one better, but you were so stuck on what you wanted it to look like that you missed it, my love. You missed it. It's here. I actually have this conversation with God frequently these days. Perhaps it's time to take a page from the Magi playbook. Here I am, following the star of my own heart on a path I don't know and can't really chart, into a place I have never been. Sometimes it feels dangerous. Some of you know that my family is going through a massive shift right now, and it is not what I saw in the stars for myself 24 years ago. I never wanted to be, as I have often said, sort of depressingly, a divorced lady, and I still don't really. I look up at the stars and I often feel not inspired to journey into the dark with wee tiny lights, but rather alone, sometimes lost even. I look up and say, when is the sun coming out? Or can I just have my other path back, please? If I am forced to follow tiny lights in the dark, as it seems I am, can I have proofs, figures, charts, a diagram maybe, a map of some kind if there's no GPS on my phone to soothe me? It is now, of course, when I find that wonder and mystery is really what I need, and a willingness to start out in the dark with just enough light. That I chose this path. I wasn't forced at all. That's usually the way it is, if we're honest. In his poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, Walt Whitman wrote, "When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures, were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when sitting, I heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick. Till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars." In this season of Epiphany, manifestation, find yourself in the story maybe. Step out into what is unknown in your own life. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you, said the prophet Isaiah. Even if darkness covers your earth, the Lord has arisen upon you, and you will be the light. Then you shall see and be radiant, says the prophet. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, even in the darkness, and you will have everything you need. Your journey may be unpredictable. You may find yourself saying, I don't know, for many more steps than you like. Things may seem dark, but in the mystical, moist night air, from time to time, look up in perfect silence at the stars. Perhaps something wonderful is afoot in the world again.